welcome to today's Partner Center. Today we're speaking about the Data Manager API, so how to unlock first-party data power with our new unified Data Manager API. So today it's myself, who's a solution architect on measurement in Google, and I also have my colleague Sono with me, who is a measurement expert in Google, and together we are working closely with our clients in Central Europe. We're really happy to have you all here, and because we have a really packed agenda and we're having a lot of interesting topics. So first, I'm going to start a little bit about the introduction to Data Manager and the API. So why is it really beneficial to use the new Data Manager API, and how is it different from maybe existing APIs you already know? Then Sono will continue on how you can actually start using the API. What is the the schema behind it, the concept, and getting you a lot of more technical details. She will also cover then in the part after some use cases. How can you ingest audiences, and how can you also use that for ingesting conversion data? And then she's going to finish with a part of where you actually see how it's looking in practice with a demo and actually sending some requests to the API and really having you an easy starting point that you can use the Data Manager API as easy as possible. And then we're going to finish with a little bit of a sneak peek into our roadmap. So what is coming this year and after. And then we will still have some time for our FAQ, so you can ask them a lot of questions, and also sharing some of our resources that might be beneficial for you in the future. With that, let's get directly into it and start with the Data Manager. So, as you all know, it's really sometimes a struggle to connect multiple user touch points because advertisers store data in different backends, and then you also have to really send it to a lot of different data sources. So even in Google, we have a lot of different APIs, a lot of different tools, and it's sometimes quite a struggle to actually get all of these data into one single or to different tools, which can really hinder the ads performance, because if you're not getting the same data in each tool, that means you're comparing different things. And that's what we really want to make it easier for you. So we are actually want to bring it all together, making it easy as possible for you to bring all of your data into our different tools in Google. That is really important because data strength is the core foundation of a strong measurement strategy. If you're not sending and making it easy for you to actually send us your first-party data, it's not really helping you for your ad performance. So first-party data is the foundation for all AI-powered solutions, and therefore really crucial that you're using and sending first-party data. We're also working on new privacy technologies like trusted execution environments that are integrated into Data Manager and make it as easy as possible, but also as privacy friendly as possible for more skeptical advertisers. So these are the core fundamentals of Data Manager. To first, having a simplified first-party data ingestion. Second, having this data then used for AI-powered solutions like AI Max, Performance Max, and so on, all of our AI tools. And then also integrating privacy-friendly technologies like trusted execution environments into Data Manager. So Data Manager is the solution that brings that all together. It all started in 2024 in Google Ads, and you might have seen that before. So in Google Ads, you can go into Data Manager and having a unified interface to connect different tools with really just a few clicks. This is really a very, very simple way to actually integrate and import audiences or conversions. But always, it's only possible for some kind of integrations that we offer. I mean, we're having a lot of integrations, and we're constantly working on getting more integrations into Data Manager. But the UI really focused on having these simple UI integrations that are for big players out there, but not for every integration. Obviously, it's possible to have this one-click integration. And therefore, for 2026, and already last year we actually want to expand on that and having a single API that you can use to send your data to Google and really then activate it for first-party data solutions. Also, what the UI already supports is confidential matching for customer match. That means your data is, or the advertiser's data is processed and executed in a trusted execution environment. So that's really like a really separate cloud environment where you can even get attestation. That means you can see it's only stored there, and after it's processed, it's not used for anything else. Now that we are having this already in Google Ads, we are also having this new API to actually helping you and make it easier for you to bring data into Google platforms. But what kind of data can you actually bring into our platforms? There's 3 types of data that are supported by the Data Manager UI or the Data Manager API. So it's the same for both of them. The first one is audience data. So customer match audiences are powered by first-party data. So you can use the Data Manager API to actually send us your user information that then can be filled as a customer match audience. So you can power these data for your audience strategy and target highly relevant users. The second use case is conversion data. So you can share offline data of users that actually converted and therefore are valuable for a business. You can send this data via the Data Manager UI or the Data Manager API. And then the third use case is kind of expanding on that. It's also like a way to send additional data for users that converted online, but might be missing some information. So you already have a tag firing on the website, but you want to enrich it with additional details for an even higher conversion uplift. So all of these 3 use cases are supported by the Data Manager, but also by the new Data Manager API, which is now generally available. So end of last year, we released the Data Manager API, which is a push API to enable all ingestion use cases. This is to ease developer integration and ensure privacy centricity. That's our vision for the Data Manager API. What does that mean actually? So all ingestion use cases means we want to have a single API for all of our products. That means Google Analytics, Google Ads, SAC60, CMC60, DVC60, and so on. Ease developer integration means we want to make it as easy as possible for developers with an OO's playground to actually test and play around with this integration and actually build and send data to our API. And ensure privacy centricity, which I already mentioned, confidential matching, which is already possible for integrations via the Data Manager UI, will also be supported for integrations or like sending data to the Data Manager API. So we also support confidential matching via the API. Having this new unified API schema enables you to actually send it and integrate all your data from all of your advertisers and send it to Google across all of Google buying stores, which making it definitely way easier of having separate APIs. So you can only send the data once and then select which endpoints data should be received to. You're also having comprehensive use cases. So you can use it, as mentioned before, for audience use cases. You can use it for conversion imports. And you can also use it, as I mentioned, for multiple data sources, so actually connecting online and offline data. And then the last point, it's also privacy by default. We will support the trusted execution environments to really making sure it's a privacy-friendly API. So these are 3 big benefits of the new Data Manager API, which is a benefit for all of your advertisers you're working with that can actually use it. In 2025, as I mentioned before, we launched our API, but we didn't launch fully yet. So at the moment, we actually support audience use cases in Google Ads and DVC60. We're also supporting confidential matching for customer match audiences. On top of that, for Google Ads, we also support offline conversion import and enhanced conversions for leads, so which I mentioned earlier, conversions. And then you can also send additional details, which are session attributes and IP address support. These are the audience use cases that are supported. So audiences are supported on the Google Ads and the DVC60 site. On the Google Ads side on top, we also have the conversion import capabilities. And then the last point, which I was referring, the online and offline combination of data is conversion with multiple data sources, which is currently supported as an alpha for Google Ads and Google Analytics, and is rolling out in the future. And then the last thing, you also have a status API to actually see how actually the API is performing. How does this all fit together? Because you might be wondering, okay, you're hearing a lot of different things from Google. You're also already using a Google tag on your website. Now you're also having a data manager UI and an API. So this all basically aligns hand in hand together. So what we define as our data manager structure and strategy is really having you the most durable first-party data strings set up, which means first, having a Google tag with Google Tag Gateway on your website, or if you're an app customer, having the SDK in the app of your advertisers. Then on top, enriching that data with additional data via in-UI connectors in the Data Manager UI, or if there's no UI connector available, but I expand on that in a second, you can also use the API to send data to Data Manager. So there is really both ways are possible, but we definitely still recommend having a Google tag or an SDK on the website implemented. And then it's really about maximizing your signals, which means having ad interaction signals that really gives us the information when someone interacted with an ad, but also having customer signals, so user data that actually describes information about the user, so you know what kind of users are interacting with your businesses. And then the last point, transaction signals. So that's actually what is valuable to the business. So all of these three signals should be sent via Data Manager, which can be the Google tag or the Data Manager UI or API. And then the last piece, you can activate all of these data points across all of our different tools, which in the future will be Google Analytics 4, Google Ads, SAC60, CMC60, and DVC60. So that is how it all fits together. So it's really not one or the other. It's all kind of combining Google Tag and the UI, Data Manager, or the API. You could even use both of them, but this is really kind of the main question, right? We're hearing a lot from different advertisers. When should you use the UI for Data Manager? When should you use the API? So my advice would always be first, check if there's a native integration via one of our connectors in the Data Manager UI. If there is one of these integrations, use that because it's just definitely way easier and faster to start leveraging. If there is no native integration, you can move on to step 2 to actually checking with the advertisers. Can they send data programmatically? If they can't send data programmatically via an API, you need to look into other use cases like Zapier, for example, where you can integrate a lot of other tools and bring that into our platforms, or uploading manual files like via SFTP, for example, which are easier than integrating with an API. However, in case there is no native integration and you can send data programmatically to Google, then you can check if your use case is available via Data Manager API. As I mentioned before, it's at the moment available for Google Ads, audiences, and conversions, and for DVC60 also, but only for audiences. If one of these two is your use case, yes, then go ahead with the Data Manager API. If your use case is not supported, so it's, for example, the SAC60 API, then use this existing product-specific API. So that is kind of a small decision tree that might help you to decide between Data Manager UI, other APIs from Google, or the Data Manager API. But in the future, we definitely want to expand on the API coverage, but we also have a roadmap at the end of today's session. So we will hear a bit more when we actually have this supported. With that, actually, I will hand over to Sono now, who will walk you a bit more through how you can actually set this up, how to get started with Data Manager API, and some of the core concepts.
Thank you so much, Yannick, and hello to everyone. As mentioned before from him and introduced, I'm Sonna, working as a measurement expert, as as a colleague from Yannick, and will guide you through today through the more the technical setup of the API and the two specific use cases when it comes to audience ingestion and event data ingestion. But let's start first by looking into how to set up the API in general. So getting to know the core concept of the Data Manager API and how to set it up for the use cases as mentioned before. So you might be familiar already with the onboarding process of the API because you might have used the Google Ads API before, and the steps in between or the steps from setting up the endpoints to testing and validating the first API calls might look similar. So it follows, so the setup of the Data Manager API, it follows basically the standard Google Cloud patterns, platform patterns. So it means that you need to have a GCP project to be able to activate the service, to set up the authentication process, and to be able to test and perform API calls. So if you have worked with the Google Ads API, it works quite similar. You have a GCP project. You need to enable the API first in the GCP project, and then you need to set up the product authorization, so set up the user or service account to be able to send requests to those endpoints. So once authenticated, we authorize the specific product, like for Google Ads, and finally move to testing and validating the implementation. I mentioned that one already before, but to be able to perform these steps, first, you would need to have a cloud project. So you cannot skip this step because you would need it. It's used for building permissions and for our part. So whatever you use this GCP project for, but for our use case, you would need to have it available to enable the Data Manager API. Permission part in the middle is specifically for allowing the user account or service account you have created to send requests to the endpoint. So without this, you cannot toggle the API request on or the API access on. And last but not least, we would highly recommend and to use the Google Cloud CLI for the initial setup, because it allows you to quickly run commands for and to verify the environment and to actually debug your code. So these are the prerequisites before even able to use or test the API and to send calls to the endpoints. What are the particular steps for setting up the API? So it looks familiar, as I said before, as for the Google Ads API users. So you might know this already. So you need to enable the API, set up the authentication. Then you need to grant the email associated with the user account or service worker account to the destination. So you would need to add the user to the destination, let's say Google Ads, and then setting up or choosing the client library before and to set up the SDK. So this is the whole customer journey or user journey, how to set up the API. And we will go through every step within the next few slides. Before I move on, and I just want to mention that, feel free, because we see some questions already coming in, but feel free to submit your questions in the chat so we are able to cover them at a later step in the Q&A section. So let's start with enabling the API. Within your GCP project, you will have the API library section. So if you haven't already, you would need to enable the Data Manager API by clicking Enabling the Data Manager by looking for it in the library. So this is a quite easy step. You go into the API console, you would be able to see all the possible libraries and all the possible services. And then what you would need to do is to select the API and to enabling it. Just a simple note here. So the process of enabling an API, generally speaking, it varies the way how to enable it. It sometimes can differ from DM API to Google Ads API. Sometimes you would need more information to enable it. But for this, it should be quite simple. It's just a toggle on or just a button click. Brilliant. The next step would be to make a decision who is able to call the API or use the API, which is either a user done by a user account or a service account. So if you have a user account who needs to be added then to the Google Ads account or the destination account, or if you have a backend integration which represents an application, which is a service account and not a person, it uses a key file, so a JSON file, to authenticate in the background. So these are the two different options. Both are possible. It's just you would need to decide which way to choose and to add them, and that's for the next type, and to add them to the respective accounts. The process is quite similar. You would have the email address of the user account or the associated email address to the service worker account, and to add them to the destination you want to ingest data to. Great. Last but not least, and this is also documented in the great developer documentation we have, because you would have all the code snippets for those client libraries. So we would we are offering the different samples of code in our developer documentation. You would need to choose the client library you want to use, and of course, and it's up to you how you use the developer documentation to set up the different calls, or to check to use the validation options and so on. But these are the SDKs you can use, and you need to set up. Going to the next section, which shows you the different use cases that Data Manager API is available for as of now. Since we are in the early stages of the DM API, we're using it for data ingestion, and the API handles two distinct data types. So, and that's something Yannick has already mentioned before. We are able to send audience data, but we are also able to send conversion events. So audience ingestion, but I'm adding here, we are also able to remove audience data from audience lists for the purpose of customer, at the end for customer match, and to send conversion events to the conversion type offline website import from clicks, so import from clicks, or in a future state, or in the future, also to add additional offline data in combination to online data. Today, we will particularly focus on these two use cases, to conversion type offline website import from clicks and for customer match. Let's start with sending audience data to Google Ads, but remember that this functionality is available for customer match audiences, not only for Google Ads, but also for DV360, mobile device ID audiences for Google Ads and display DV360, and so on. So this is for customer match, and as mentioned before from Yannick, we're using here the TEE for confidential matching, so to process customer match data and to support the encryption. First, looking into the requirements, which is to have for audiences already an audience list available in the destination account. Here is an example. I've used Google Ads to create a customer list for customer match, to create it as a pre-requirement in the Google Ads account, so that we have a destination to send or to make the API calls. Two options here to do so: on the left-hand side, directly in the UI, on the right-hand side. And remember, this is via Google Ads API, because as of now, we are not supporting creating new audience lists via DM API. But if you're a Google Ads API user, you are able to create them directly there. But this is the one requirement we would have. Otherwise, it would end up in nowhere, sending those audience lists. How does it look like sending data to for customer match? So we would need to prepare within the API call, prepare the destinations. What do I mean with that? Is like defining the destination account, the user account, the linked user account, and so on. So, and also the specific audience list you want to send data to. Second, we would need to prepare the audience data, meaning how to format the data, how does the audience object or audience member object looks like, what type of data are we able to send, and so on. At the end, we're putting it all together to build the request body and to send the request. On the right-hand side, and this is how I will proceed for the other use case as well, is I show the whole object, meaning the whole object to send audience data, and in a later step, how to send conversion event data. And within the next few slides, I will go into the definition of each object, meaning we have here the destination object, the audience member object, and I will focus on those because these are the most important ones, but also to mention that for EEA, for the region EEA especially, we need to have the consent object here defined as well, but also all of the other, not objects, but the parameters to send the API call. One example would be the terms of service. Before sending the data, you would need to, for example, make sure that the terms of services to use to make usage of customer match list data needs to be done in the destination account. But yes, that's the full object. That's the full call. I will dive deeper into each of the objects within the next slide, starting with the destination. So how to prepare a destination, meaning where to route the data to. So the destination blocks tell the block tells the API where to route the batch of users or the user data. And there are different parameters you would need to set. So the operating account, for example, is the account that owns the data. This could be a Google Ads sub account. The login account is typically the MCC manager account. So if you're authenticating via manager structure, meaning that you have an MCC hierarchy, so one manager account with multiple sub-accounts, you would need to define these in the destination object. And the login account is the credentials you have direct access to the child account too. So this is something very important because depending on the account hierarchy you have, you would need to set those different parameters differently. So this is how to set up the destination. And as a next step, I want to show you the different fields as a reference. So the login account, these are all optional, but most importantly, I wanted to highlight the operating account and the product destination ID, which is the audience ID in our use case, but in a later step, it would be the conversion action type ID, right? So this is important to let the API call or by making the API request to let the system know where to send the data to. Amazing. As a next step, the most important part is what type of data, what parameters I would like to send as audience data. So this is defined by using the user identifier object. And within this user identifier object, as you might know already by doing customer match list or by importing customer match list, can include email address, phone number, and the address object. We recommend ideally to have the email address set, but whatever you have here, you're free to send more parameters, especially when it comes to the conversion event. Here, sorry that I need to correct myself because here it's a union field in the identifier and you can only use one of the following. Sorry, I was mixing up the conversion event, which is enhanced conversion for leads. But here you have the email address and the phone number, and it's up to you which one to send, but it needs to be at least one of those. How to format and meaning normalizing and hashing the data. You would need to normalize the data first by looking into removing all of the leading and trailing and intermediate white spaces, removing the dots, and then before hashing them by using the SHA-256 algorithm, and to comma separate the email addresses for the API calls. So here on the right-hand side, you can see from a plain text email address list, normalization and how the hashing would happen. And this is how you would generate the user identifier list for the object audience members. Great. This is a sample, a code sample, how it would look like. So you would have the user data objects and the user identifier. In this case, we're using email addresses. And you can see it's a hashed value. So it got normalized and hashed after before putting it as a value for the API calls. This is how the whole, and it's a little bit fast, but this is how the whole user request would look like. We will go later into a demo where we can dive deeper into the request itself. But here you can see that there are multiple user data objects with email addresses. At the end, you would have also the consent status to those to this call set. So for all of the data, we have add user data and add personalization set to consent granted to be able to use them for matching and for the customer match list. So that would be all to how to build the call, build the data, and to send the call. If you perform the API call, you would always get a request ID. This is very relevant for those cases where you want to validate and troubleshoot a request where you get an response error, an error response. So for every call you get, you have the request ID, and with a service or with a function from the DM API, we'll show you later, you're able to use this request ID for further troubleshooting to get more information about the successful or failed request type. Great. What type of, speaking of errors, what type of different error responses are we able to get? So it's just two examples where for one API call, an email address containing a plain text, meaning it did not get normalized or hashed, is used instead of a hex encoded value. And this is the error response we would get. And at the bottom, you can see invalid hex encoding. Or an email address that isn't hashed and is only hex encoded, you would also see a different error response which says invalid SHA-256 format. So we do have different level of error response codes. The reference in the documentation or the guides would give you more information about the various error scenarios. Great. Jumping to the next use case, which is sending events. And Yannick was already mentioned that before. So first, I want to quickly recall the different use cases for sending events, meaning that we are able to send or ingest data for the use case of offline conversion tracking, meaning standard offline conversion tracking by using the GCLID only, or enhanced conversion for leads as a recommended way. The second and the third use case would be sending additional data to a Google Ads or Google Analytics destination, which we will not touch today, but which will be possible in the future to send for a conversion type or event type website additional data. But today we will focus on step one, which is offline conversion tracking, enhanced conversion for leads, where the requirement would be that the conversion action, of course, is already created in the system, meaning in Google Ads, right? So you would need to have the conversion action created. You would need to have and know the conversion action type ID to send the data to this destination. How does the request body looks like in this use case? So on the right-hand side, again, the whole object, we have the destination definition, the event, the consent, and also if the true-false value for validate only, the encryption info, and so on. I will go through the same step as we have done for audience members, meaning how to prepare the destination, this will be the same, how to prepare the event data, what type of objects are included into in the events part, but also how to build the ingestion service request for events and how to send it. Similar to the audience part, to be honest. So again, here I'm not gonna dive deeper into that part because we already covered that in the audience ingestion part. But you can see here the product destination ID will be a different one. So this will be a conversion action ID and not an audience member ID, right? So this is the most relevant one here. How to prepare event data for the standard OCI or EC4 leads purposes. Remember that the recommended way how to ingest data for offline conversion tracking would be to send as many identifiers as possible, meaning from moving a Google Click ID only import to enhanced conversion for leads, meaning we are upgrading this part by using the PII, the hashed email address, the phone number, address object, and so on. And the newest one is our session attributes. Remember here, and just to correct what I said before as well, you can use multiple identifiers here, right? That's the difference. You can make use of the GCL ID, the email address, and so on. So these are the identifiers which are used for offline conversion or enhanced conversion for leads. Transaction ID here is optional, but highly recommended to use for deduplication of the events. That's very important to mention. And the event source needs to be set as well. But I will show you what type of parameters can be set here later on. The other use cases I wanted to, it's just nice to know because it will be more relevant in the future, is event sends an additional data source to Google Ads destination or Google Analytics destination, where the biggest difference here is that the event source is web, right? So we are sending the data as additional data to a web conversions. And also there are some differences in the identifiers which needs to be set or are required. Here, also to mention is that the transaction ID is in any case required. So for the offline purpose, we say it's optional, but it's highly recommended, especially for deduplication or most importantly for deduplication. Perfect. We're going into more code samples now, but as I mentioned, I want to dig deeper into the object of user data or the event data object, which is defined here with multiple fields and parameters. And as you can see, we do not have only the user data and the identifiers here. We have a lot more, which you might already know or are familiar with when you do conversion tracking by having the conversion value set, the currency, and so on, and card data. For us, it's important to know how to populate the user data object and the identifiers. I just want to highlight here that the formatting, especially for the timestamp, so the event timestamp, but also the currency is very important because this is the most common error root cause when it comes to importing offline conversions. The timestamp is always the time the actual conversion happened and needs to be formatted in the correct way. On the right-hand side, you see additional, more Google Analytics relevant parameters, but we will focus on the user data and the ad identifiers today. Transaction ID, as I said, it's optional, but recommended. The user data, this is the user provided data, which is the email address or the phone number, and the ad identifiers, meaning these are the all the automatically created, like the Google Click ID parameters. How does it look like? So the ad identifiers, as I mentioned before, could be the Google Click ID, the IP address, all the session attributes, which are new and available as fields to be filled and to be sent from the advertiser. User provided data is defined within the user identifier object. And here you can see the definition. Ideally, you send as many parameters as possible. Remember that in some areas, especially the IP address in the EEA, UK, so in this area, it's not required to send those because it's excluded for measurement purposes in those areas. But for all of the others, if you're able to send them, it's recommended to have them available. The ad identifiers, just quickly here, it's not only the Google Click ID for the use cases where IS devices, where the GCL ID is not, it's not available, but the G braid, the W braids from web to app from app to web, but also from web to app conversions, we would have this alternative parameter, the braids parameter, so other click identifiers, which can also be set here. So either or, and can be used for attribution. One slide to the session attributes. This is usually one object, so it depends on how you are able to capture session attributes. You can have a JavaScript helper function on your website, how to retrieve the information. You can send it within one object, or you have this information defined and can define it directly via those fields. This is something you would need to capture in addition to the GSL ID by having the form or the lead information stored in your backend, and to send it via DM API. Here, I mentioned it briefly before already, but the user identifier object, it can be the email address, the phone number, and the address object. And all of them needs to be, as for the audience member lists, normalized and hashed before set and sent to Google Ads or the destination of your choice. Right, so this is important. Otherwise, you would see an error, as we saw for the similar to the error response log we got from the audience member request samples. I mentioned before the event source, where we need to have the web value set for enhancing conversion, online conversion data for Google Ads and Google Analytics. But for example, we have other options here for app in-store phone and other. So this is optional for offline conversions and enhanced conversion for leads. But for the other use cases, for importing event data, you would need to set it to that. How to build the request body, you can see the destination account here. Then we would have the ad identifier, which is wrongly set by a string and not by a real GSL ID, and the different objects to user data with the email addresses, but also here additional information which you can still send, so card data. But then we have another object ad identifier with user data and email addresses. So this is a request with multiple user data or with event data, and as a sample request. So this is also something you can look up on the developer documentation. Again, if you want to test and to further troubleshoot, all of those, they provide you a so-called request ID, which you can choose for later to see the particular error response logs. I'm going to jump now, just to give you an example how it would work, to the demo and validation. So first, we will look into how to ingest audience lists, so audience data. For that, as I mentioned before, what we need to have is the audience list already created in Google Ads. This is a sample or a test account from my end. And as you can see here, I have the DM API training test customer list already created. What we need for creating those calls is, first of all, my account ID, right, on the right-hand side at the top, and the list ID. So I think we're answering now one question, pre-submitted question already, where what type of identifier or destination ID or name do I need to have to send the data to? So it will be always the ID of the list or the conversion type action ID and the destination account. So you would need to have those to send the data via DM API. And the very nice thing with the new documentation is that, and I'm jumping now to the developer part, is that you have on the right-hand side a panel where you can try all of the methods. So you can see here that I've drafted one request to send audience list data. This is the previously copied account ID, which is the one on the right top side of my account, and the product destination ID, which is the audience member ID. We can see that I have set two email addresses. I'm sending data of two email addresses in a hashed way for one user data object and another one where the phone number and email address is available. We have the user consent, the consent given, and also for validation purposes, we have the validate only set to false. So I'm going to execute this request. First, I need to authenticate. Yes, so just a second. So we need to execute And then you would see that here at the bottom or in the second window, you can see that it's a successful request with a given request ID. If I would, for example, and I'm going to copy this first to show you later how to get the response log. If I would change something from here, so let's say I'm gonna just change the email address of one, we would get an error response with more information. So we have a different request ID, but also an invalid argument, so the hex encoded value is malformed, and so on. So you would get more information about the request you want to perform here. But I've copied the request ID from the previously successful request before. And what I'm going to do now is using the playground, and you might notice this is a Google Developers Playground, where you can actually test a service. And I've selected here the Data Manager API. So I'm using this service, Data Manager, authorize APIs for testing. Allow this one first for testing. Then I need to get an authorization access token, which I'm doing here to be able to, by using the HTTP method, to get the response code of this GET request. And I'm showing you now which one I'm using. So to get more information about the request status, I'm using this GET method, the Data Manager Google API request status retrieve, and adding the request ID as a URL parameter, which I have done here now. So we have make it a little bit bigger. So I have copied the request URL, adding the request ID here, and the previously copied request ID from the successful to get more of the response. And here you can see we have user identified count 4 and record count 2. So this is the way how you're able to validate the request you're doing and to get more information for troubleshooting. So always keep in mind that you have the request ID ready to test it there. So we have 13 minutes left, which is perfect for the last part of the session. I'm moving on to the next one, which is the roadmap. I'm handing over to Yannick. Thank you so much.
Great, thanks so much, Sono, for all the technical details. So now, and we saw already some of your questions coming in, okay, when is this platform supported and so on, let's speak a bit about the roadmap to give you some visibility what is coming, because as I mentioned before, not all platforms are yet supported, but that's definitely our vision. So what is supported as of today? Google Ads is fully supported. So that means you can send conversions and also audience data to Google Ads. The other thing that is already supported is DVC60 to send audiences, which is also already supported. What is also coming is support for Search Ads 360. It's on the roadmap for 2026. The same for Campaign Manager 360, which is also on the roadmap. And that means for both of these tools, conversions and also audience capabilities to be sent via Data Manager API. A bit sooner, and we is on the roadmap, is full support for Google Analytics to send all kind of events. As we said already, at the moment there was already an alpha to send events from multiple sources to actually enrich existing data that were collected on the tag, but the full support for all kind of events is coming this year. And then also for DVC60, as I said, audiences are supported, but also conversions are actually coming for DVC60, and that's also a bit earlier than the Campaign Manager 360 and Search Ads 360 support. So that's, as I said, is the overall supported platforms as we have today and for the future. Let's go a bit more into the details, what kind of features are coming next, because this is our overall strategy for the whole year. If we look into the next months and next quarter, we can see for February, we are having a few more launches coming up. One of them is actually to be able to create the audience list directly via the API. So as Sono was sharing earlier, you have to actually create the audience at the moment before in the UI. We're also working on a way to actually be able to send this via the API. And then there's also the functionality for licenses to be created via the API. And then there's two very specific Google Ads features that are planned for February is customer match user ID support. So at the moment you can't send the user ID there. And then also to update conversion values, which was also, I think, one of the questions in the chat already. On the GMP side, we're also working on supporting DMP and commerce audiences to actually giving you a bit more flexibility on what kind of audiences you can use Data Manager API on. Then moving on to March, we're having more features for the Google Ads specific part of Data Manager. So that means store sales will be supported. And a big feature set is actually showing you what you're sending via the API in the Data Manager interface in Google Ads. So that means you can still send data via the API, but now you're having actually insights and some diagnostics of the API calls in your Google Ads interface. Then for GA4, we are expanding the support a bit more from this very specific alpha right now to any event support and also app support for GA4. For GMP, we're having then for March the conversion features to be supported. So that means especially for DVC60 that at the moment only supports audiences, we are also planning there the conversion feature and also conversion with multiple data sources. That is Q1. The timing might still change, as I heard from our product team that there might be some small changes based on a lot of internal and external factors. If we move on to Q2, we're also having a lot of improvements planned there as well. So over all of these general API features, there's a status API improvements plan that will give you a little bit more insights there. Then for Google Ads, we also want to enable confidential matching for conversions, because at the moment it's only for customer match, but then we want to bring that functionality also for enhanced conversions there. And then on the GMP side, we also want to bring ingest cookie-based user lists, so also that you can send this cookie-based users, and also ingest CTV identifiers to actually having you a lot of more data points that you can send to the Data Manager API. That is a little bit more details into the next features that are coming. On top of that, there's also over the course of 2026 a lot of more additional points coming, as I mentioned earlier, and also full support is on the roadmap for SLC60 and CMC60. With that, we're coming closer to the end, but we want to share a little bit of resources with you. So first, we have a really extensive developer documentation on Data Manager API, where you can find a lot of these details that you also saw today, with even more details for some of that. To really go, I would really recommend going into these details, checking it out, because it's really a great resource to find all of these additional information for the Data Manager API. Then what also Sono was just showing is the API Explorer. So you can play around with the API, build your API calls and make sure these are working. And the API Explorer is a really great tool to actually build and play around and have an easy way to test if something would work. So I can really highly recommend that. And then the last things, we have also support for the Data Manager API. So there is a contact form link there, and you can also see it here on the screen. So you can select what kind of support you need. And this is really the best place if you have any kind of questions that were an answer in the developer documentation or today. With that, we are going into a Q&A for the last part. And we're having a few questions already that were pre-submitted, or we also saw some of your questions already for today. So the first questions, and I will read the question. As for Google Ads API, are there any limitations in the number of requests an advertiser can send per day? Is there anything to consider for sending audience lists or conversion events? And I hand over to Sono to explain a bit more.
Yes, so as we had for the Google Ads API, we have some limitation when it comes to batch uploads to the maximum limits of requests we get per day. So we do have some limitations when it comes to audience members and conversion events, as you can see here, within an audience member list, but also user identifier used within the user data object. So it depends on which use case you're working on, because the numbers here are different for audiences and for conversions. So you would need to separate them out in batches if you want to exceed the number of, for example, user identity, the list you're sending. Thank you. Going to the next slide. I'm gonna read the question and also what I want to send. If I want to send audience members for different destinations, can I send them at once within one API call?
Yes, and I can answer that. So it is possible to send audience members to multiple destinations by using the destination reference. So you can see here on the screen actually one of the examples, and you can see that you can actually easily do this by using this multiple destination references. Moving on to the next question. When we upload conversion in batches, is it possible to receive status of individual conversions, not just the batch overall, e.g. GCL ID, XYZ was not processed because of, and so on?
Yes, so we showed you the request ID, how to validate if a request ID was successful, if a request was successful by using a request ID to get a general summary of the API call. But as you were used from the standard offline conversion import, but also enhanced conversion for leads manually or whatever ingesting method you were choosing, we do offer a more defined error response log for each line, meaning that the GCL ID has not been found or this particular record, the hashing was incorrectly. For this, there is a method which is called request status.retrieve, and you get a list of all possible processing errors, which is documented as well in the developer documentation. So yes, it's possible per destination and per call, should be possible.
Okay, going on to the next question, and this is on use cases and destination. So what are the primary ways Data Manager API should be used for media ad tech use cases, and which use cases are inappropriate?
For data partners, and I understood the way that media ad tech, so there are the advertiser use cases and the media partner, which I understood as data partner that can use similar methodologies as for advertisers. So as of now, the functionality of the DM API offers ingesting and removing audience members for Google Ads and DV360 and to ingest event data. Depending on the region you're operating on, just make sure that you have the consent of all of the user data you're sending. To the next one, is there any other way to extract the audience segment data we see in the Google Ads platform other than using the user list? The names of the user list don't match with the audience segment name, so they don't align.
Yes, and I think Sona was already explaining this, but maybe to go a bit more into details, it's really important that you need to define the destination ID, which is equal to the audience ID. So Sona was also showing an interface where you can see the audience list ID rather than the name of the audience segment. So really make sure you're using that list ID, and then you should be able to push these audience segments to Google Ads. Moving on to and see if we have one more here on the setup. If we are already using the CMC60 API for offline conversion, what's the benefit of switching to the Data Manager API? And maybe this one, to make this very clear, there is of today, you can keep using all existing APIs. There is no need to switch over to the new API. However, if you're sending the same data to multiple endpoints, it's just easier to just rely on a Data Manager API because you can then send it with the same call actually to multiple endpoints. So it's just easier for you in the setup. And especially for new implementations, I would recommend relying on a Data Manager API because that is our recommended API going forward. And we are working on a lot of new features that might only be available for the new Data Manager API. But as of today, you can really keep using all of the existing APIs.
Brilliant. Thank you. And with this, just wanted to mention, we got a lot of more questions and we saw them trying to, and we'll work on answering those for the follow-up. But last but not least, because it's already on time, what we would ask you is for your feedback to know how we did and also to improve the future sessions. And if you have other questions popping up in the next couple of days, we have a next office hour, which you can attend in February. And we're happy to see you there and to be able to answer the questions you have. Thank you, Yannick. Thanks to you all.
Thank you. Have a